watching us on January 25th, then please don't call us because we're not here. You're watching a rerun. How did PTC get started?
Well, I don't know, Stephen, you probably know some of the history of that.
Well, I think that I ought to defer to somebody who's been to 20...
I think it depends on who you ask. It started off with a whole group of people basically here in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii, at the East-West Center, and with what was then Hawaiian Tel. And they got together and put together a conference back in 1979, I believe it was, to address issues about the development of telecommunications in various arenas around the Pacific. That first conference, then immediately after that first conference, they formed, incorporated an organization called PTC, the Pacific Telecommunications Council, based here in Hawaii as a nonprofit, as you mentioned, and it has grown from that ever since and has stayed right here in Hawaii every year, the annual conference as well as seminars and other events throughout the Asia-Pacific region the rest of the year.
So we talked a little bit about the different technologies, and Mark, thanks for doing that as an opening. One of the things that we tend to do at PTC is we create what's been called Planet PTC, where people can sit down, browse the website to look for papers, check their email and things like that, get a little load of caffeine going. How long has that been going on, do you feel?
I think it's hard to say, but I think we were, in fact, the very first conference in the world to ever do that. And that has been going on since about the mid-'80s, or late 80s, I believe it was the first Planet PTC. And this, of course, was before web browsers. This was before, you know, general use.
In fact, one of our vendors,
I
think Oracle, provided us a messaging system for many years.
That's right. And in fact, they used us as a guinea pig to test that out in the very first year.
This is before most of our participants actually had email or used it.
And so many of them were exposed to that for the very first time at PTC.
And this year we used an interesting technology for the first time. We've had typical computers with Windows and your usual applications, let's say. Excuse me. And this year PTC collaborated with a new partner, the Hawaii Open Source Educational Foundation. Maybe let's run the clip of the Open Source Lab, and then we'll talk about this new partnership a little bit.
So the best thing about what we're doing in here is we're using computers that once upon a time were trash and easily discarded. And in this computer room, we have 30 computers running off of one centralized server. The computers we're using in here have no hard drive. If you look inside of this sample computer, you'll see that inside of here, there's no hard drive on either side. And in fact, if you remember old computers, you'll see that the memory and the CPU are so old, they're not even hot. I can touch them. So how could a computer without a hard drive possibly work? The magic takes place with the network and with this inexpensive $3 network card. It has a special little chip in it that when the computer reboots, rather than going to the hard drive for all your programs and data, it goes through that special little card, it goes through the high-speed cable, and it instead decides to get its operating system from the network. So as all these things scroll by, what's actually happening is rather than loading off of the hard drive, you're loading off of a centralized server. And suddenly, what used to be trash is a standards-compliant, NCLB-beating, computer literacy building workstation. Most importantly, it's running free software. It's one thing to decide that you can take the inexpensive hardware and buy software for it. It's no solution. This software is Linux. It's free, the code is open, and you can download it from our University of Hawaii mirror right at the ICS department.
Thanks. That's Scott Belford. You can tell he has some passion about what he's doing. And this is a new partnership for PTC. It seemed to work. Any issues?
I don't see any issues. I think that the marriage I didn't know about this, as you know, because I was just coming on the scene, and it was absolutely amazing to see somebody being creative, not with new bells and whistles technology, but actually creating something new by recycling something old and making it better. There's a real lesson in there for us, I think.
And one of the, you know, obviously with the tragic events in the Indian Ocean, the tsunami, you know, that was on a lot of people's minds. And I mean, frankly, we're working in an industry where telecommunications can be a really big help. But it was interesting to see people thinking in this case, as you mentioned, that old technology can often be repurposed in needy areas where people don't have the luxury of getting the latest and greatest equipment.
Well, and as you know, we tend to live right now, at least in the developed world, in kind of a throwaway world. And this seems to show that you can actually do something important with what you might throw away.
And Scott's Hawaii Open Source Educational Foundation, in fact, is using this technology primarily for working in schools, and he's got a great program rolling these things out, working with a large group of volunteers to get this technology into schools that wouldn't otherwise have it. Now, Mark, you were actually involved in helping put together some sessions focused on, you know, some of the areas of the world that really need some help around.